that's when you think that maybe that's to protect Castaneda and not Don Juan. Because Castaneda doesn't then have to come and say, well, show me the actual tape on which that's based. It's like these journalists who won't tell you their sources. We have a new book out apparently about George Bush's family by Kitty Kelly, that one who did the biographies of all these other crazy people. Mrs. Reagan, the Royals, Diana, I don't know who else she did. Now she's done the Bushies. And she's got all this dirt and stuff, which, you know, I don't doubt that for this smoke there's fire. But she doesn't have to ever produce her sources because she said it's based on a source that she knows, but she doesn't have to tell you who it is. And I guess it usually is based on someone, but it could just be hearsay. If she has to base it on something, she can get sued otherwise. But she's got to have something in her files. And I'm sure no one's going to sue her because to sue someone on, you know, dirt like that causes more trouble than, in the sense that you give it more publicity for you against you if you're the person being slandered, than just ignore it. Because if you ignore it, it usually goes away. But if you make a huge thing of it, even if you're right, it usually takes 2 or 3 years. And by the time the lurid stuff has been talked and bandied about, you're down the tubes anyway. So she knows no one's going to sue her. Maybe later. So tape recorders really could get you out of this problem, but people of this type really don't want to use tape. Not so much Don Juan. I don't believe Don Juan was against tape recorders. Maybe he was. So here I did this apprenticeship, first in Arizona, then in Sonora, because Don Juan moved back to Mexico during the time of my training. You talk about the real training, like he's going to a guru or doing yoga or something. My training. This is his new professor at the university or something. And later I thought that my apprentice, this kind of conduct prevented the training from being successful. I don't think it ever was going to be successful. But it got him this fancy Dan book, so he has nothing to complain about. Because it retarded the advent of the full commitment I needed to become a sorcerer myself. Carlos is going to become a sorcerer, you think? They're talking about this like it's a serious profession, and that the training is really something rigorous. Oh, well, you know, this very spotty procedure where I had to move back, that really stopped my training from, because you see that later on his training just dribbles off. He just got tired of talking to the guy and had enough stuff, and he went back home and wrote this stuff up in time to take advantage of the wave of the drug culture, you know, growing in the 60s. Yet the method was beneficial for my own he talks about these things like a graduate student. From my own personal standpoint, that allowed me a modicum of detachment and in turn fostered a sense of critical examination. Would have been impossible to attain, and I participated continuously without interruption. Oh, well, that's the good side. What is he saying, all that language? Well, the good side was that because it wasn't constant, I could think about it a bit, and it gave me a certain objectivity to be able to write it down and ponder it and understand its significance. So that was the good part. The bad part is I could never get to be a real sorcerer because it was the training was too hit or miss. And in '65, he says, like Bush discontinued the Air National Guard, I voluntarily discontinued my apprenticeship. Looks, maybe they did it to him and Bush the same year. They discontinued their apprenticeship. Anyway, I understand Bush did 300 landings or something like that. Look, I gotta admire a guy who did 300 landings. I don't care what you say. I wouldn't like to do 300 landings in those jet trainers or those other things that they were doing. That takes a little bit of guts, I think. Landings are tough stuff yeah, I'm saying. So I mean, you're not a total wimp. Well, exactly. There are a lot of people who bust out. I mean, you know, if you did 300 or so of those things, you're not just a mammy-pammy, frankly. Even if you did take a few months off to, you know, dry out occasionally. Every one of us does that. I mean, I don't think they got a lot against him on that score. Only on the fact that, you know, but everyone was running away from the war then. I mean, only the people who went and served were people who were really gung-ho, or people who just got caught in the net, or people like Kerry who had an axe to grind of some kind, wanted to show they were going to be Jack Kennedy. But nobody went out there by choice if you could avoid it. You know, I don't consider that to be some great sin. Just about all people I know found a way to lay low if they possibly could. Nobody volunteered unless you were crazy. So, few people, I mean, gung-hos, of course they did, but I'm talking about people who weren't gung-ho. I mean, Harry types who weren't professional Army guys, who weren't trying to make a career or something. You know, didn't want to be a paratrooper or something like that. You didn't volunteer unless you were trying to, you had an ulterior motive. And his ulterior motive was pretty clear. So I don't think one's better than the other on that story. Yeah. Oh yeah, they can't come back. A lot of them can't come back. You see that poor guy who was in Korea for 40 years? Did you follow that story recently in the paper? I know you guys probably don't read the paper as much as I do. That tears at your heartstrings, that poor guy. I mean, he recently got back to Japan because he was married. You know, the North Koreans used to kidnap Japanese women and other people to try to brainwash them or take their identities away from them. And one of these women was kidnapped with her mother. She was only a 16-year-old or so, or 19 or something. And her mother disappeared in North Korea, and she was all lonely. And she went to this guy who had been a kind of, I don't know if he was a deserter or what he was. He disappeared after. He'd done 8 years of service, but he was from the North Carolina mountains. He only had an education up to 7th grade. He was, you know, left school at 13, but he had 8 years in the Army, and he was a sergeant, so he was actually pretty professional in terms of his commitment to the Army, but he obviously cracked and disappeared. But they had him in some building up in North Korea where they used to have a lot of other deserters or others from the American Army, and they used to beat the living daylights out of him. Not him. They had the deserters beating each other, you know. And, you know, this one bully he tells about, he's just a slight little guy. He used to beat the hell out of him for 15 years. His story is so pathetic. It's, they want to prosecute him, but they're not really going to. They've made a deal with the Japanese government. And it's become a love story in Japan because he was supposed to be teaching people English. I'm off the subject here, but since you're talking about these kind of things, it's a pretty interesting story. This girl, this Japanese young girl that was kidnapped and had lost her identity, was sent to him to learn English. They wanted to train her in English for some reason, the North Koreans. And he was the English teacher, and he kind of fell in love with her or whatever, and he proposed marriage. And she agreed ultimately, and he said those were the happiest years of his life. And he had 2 children by her, and then the Japanese